Hi, I'm Matthew Cordes. I'm the Associate Director of Schools for the Diocese of San Diego. My three big responsibilities, because we don't have offices like you guys. I get to do our preschools, I get to do our principal hiring and leadership, and then I get to do innovation in our diocese. When we start talking about that question of what makes an exciting time, I think right now what we've figured out is that our students' learning really needs to be experience-based, and that the content is not as important as the skills that they're learning. The content is something that they can drive themselves, and they can Google almost anything now. But how do we set up those experiences so that way they're really becoming the people we want them to be in the world? We always look at how do we create leaders that the world needs most in our schools, and we're seeing that that's becoming a different type of education. They need a different teacher for that. It is not just a pathway anymore to success. It's about being able to think differently and construct new meaning out of things. And that is unbelievably exciting place to be in education right now.
Thank you.
Well, plus one everything you said too. My name is Paulette Donnellan. I proudly serve as the president for the San Diego County Office of Education's Board of Education. One of the things, and I enjoyed our conversation this morning, and it very much aligns with one of my key things is redesigning education for the modern world, right? Because we're still stuck in some of those old times, but then we're also working towards the future as well. And one of my big pushes when I joined the County Office of Education was to bring on an innovation department, and we now have an innovation department. I'm sure many of you have maybe met some of those folks or worked with those folks, but having them go out and work with school districts and helping them out. Because we have a lot of really great school districts. Vista Unified is a great example of one.
You stole one of our people.
I did. And she's really great,
We're
by
proud,
the way.
though. We're proud.
But again, they have a great legacy, right?
Yes.
So that we've got some really good people that came from Vista. And I just lost my train of thought because he totally distracted me with stealing something.
Well, you're stealing
So, and going back to the board member role as a community member, I do remember as a parent myself, we talk about those inflection moments, and I think I mentioned this last year during the same panel, but back in 1997 of all times, I remember visiting a school where the superintendent was going to give all the sixth graders laptops, right? A one-to-one program. I'm like, what is that? That's the coolest thing ever, that my son could go to school, work on his laptop, learn on his laptop, be able to take that laptop home and do what he needs to do. And I think that was even before internet was super common as well. So, and I wanted my son to be in that school. And I'm like, why can't we get all schools like this? And so that was my little inflection moment, like, gosh, we can really think outside of the box to support our students with relation to those tools that are available to our kids. So, and I think I'm going to leave it at that and let Matt talk.
Sounds good.
Talk at you a little bit.
There you go. Thanks, Paulette. So I'm Matt Doyle. I'm the newly minted superintendent of Vista Unified. It's actually my 29th year in Vista Unified, so I don't know if it's any different than it was a week ago. But I'm totally committed to our school district. And Patrick and Aaron, actually, Patrick's second person in command, are doing great work for the entire county. And we like the fact that our county is embracing this concept of innovation in education. So Vista Unified had the pleasure, actually, of having the first assistant superintendent of innovation in the entire state of California. And so it's great that it's going everywhere now, because ultimately we need our schools to think differently about the conditions for kids. And so from a technology perspective, I have a couple of thoughts. One is, and we were kind of the first school, we were the first school district in the county of San Diego to have full iPads across our middle schools. It was through a Digital Promise grant, and the purpose of it was to reimagine education. And the interesting thing about education, K-12, is that if you can make it happen in the middle school, you can pretty much make it happen anywhere with regard to technology. And so we've had a lot of success with that, but there is a caveat. So it's kind of the Disney concept of there's a caution to the story when you roll out technology, and that is technology has to be a transformational tool. It can't be a replacement. And there's always a danger with that. So with us, we call it the brush strokes. There's really three brush strokes with the transformation. One is intervention has to be early and it has to be personal. So personalization. And oftentimes when you plug kids into technology, you lose that connection. And the second one is this concept of personalizing learning so that the students are the agents of change in the classroom and not the recipients of direction. And that's a huge kind of cognitive shift for a teacher of 20 years or 30 years. And then the third one, perhaps the most important, at least we found in our district, we have 22,000 students in our district, 29 schools, is that there needs to be a relevant connection to why the technology and why the transformation. And I have to tell you, we weren't super good at that at first. Again, we were the first district in the county to have full iPads throughout the entire middles. And we didn't get it right at first. And I think the problem was the why. We missed the why aspect of it. And so we've, over many years, been able to refine that and focus in on the fact that it's the connection to the real world and how they use this tool as a transformational device rather than as a device that occupies students' time. It's really critical. It seems like a simple statement, but it's really profound in terms of how you ensure that it has kind of longevity over the years. And that we're fortunate to say that one of our middle schools, Rancho Minerva Middle School, as a matter of fact, one of our highest impact middle schools, the highest percentage of students with free and reduced lunch, has won the Digital Videography Award nationally and internationally for 3 years in a row. And they've been represented the United States in Tokyo for 3 years, the Panasonic Award. And that's a result of using technology as a transformative tool for students to tell their story as learners.
Awesome.
Can I just add on to something? I'm just going to add on something that you mentioned about this iPad deployment and how it didn't kind of work the way it did. And that's the why. But I also appreciate that there's a school district out there that is the pioneer. That somebody's got to do it first, right? And then you're going to do it first, and you're going to fail. Not completely.
That was a faceplant at first.
Yeah, but that's okay, and we learn from that. But I just wanted to point that out. So.
Yeah.
With our schools, and I think in most schools, we relate to each other with stories. The stories that we tell are the way that we actually drive change. And having those people to go out and tell stories is important. I think that when we look at our system in our schools, our high schools have kind of taken a lot of those big leaps. Cathedral Catholic, Mater Dei, OLP, and Saints have really done a lot of great work. But those stories are kind of somewhat hard for our elementary schools to get a hold of, if that makes sense, because with the bigger budgets and those types of things of high schools, it just provides more opportunity at some point. But we're starting to see our elementary schools, and we've got a cohort of 4 right now going through a large change to constructivist education, really working with the 5 E's, asking questions, having them fact pieces, and then applying the technology back through the help of LMU and their Ideal Institute around really driving learning and accelerating those pieces that provides a story that our other schools are now starting to follow. And maybe they won't get to the overall place that these 4 schools will get, but they'll start to take those pieces and move forward. And so with us, what we're really trying to do is create those stories of our schools, not only for our parents, but for our other schools, so that way we can learn from each other and grow. And to do that, we have to develop that empathy with each other and be able to tell our stories not in a threatening way, but in a way of an example leading forward. And I think that in itself, in either a district or a diocese, as we call, is one of the big keys to the change. But the change comes from the why.
So my why I started to talk about, and then I got distracted with the whole Aaron English thing, so we stole her. But now it came back. It's coming. I'm bringing it back. So I started talking about how when I first came onto the San Diego County Board of Education, there was a lot of really great deep pockets of excellence going on in San Diego County at certain districts, right? Doing some amazing things. These guys had an XQ
That's right.
super school is still going forward. We have a lot of Go Open school districts. You're one of them.
One of them.
Geez, Vista, come on. And there's just a lot of really great activities. I think even Lakeside, you've got some really innovative activities going on within your school district as well. So with that said, we wanted to eyeball and analyze those districts and see what are they doing that's really great and what can we do to support them even more. And maybe take some of those activities that those school districts are doing and replicate throughout the county and even nationally, right?
Yeah.
So, and I got to share with you, in addition to my board duties, I do have a regular job. This is something I do in my spare time, and I work with Lego Education. But I got to tell you, it's a lot of fun. In fact, I was at an event yesterday up in Los Angeles, and to have people come up to me and say, "Hey, we're hearing about really great things going on in San Diego County." It just makes me super, I'm sure you've heard it too. It makes me super, super proud of what we've got going on in this county, and that we're really making waves throughout the rest of the country as far as what can be done in our classrooms.
fantastic. I didn't know that you worked for Lego. That's really cool.
Yeah, it's an awesome job.
Okay, I have two thoughts. One is at the site level, and the other is at district level in terms of transformation and technology. The first one at the site level, it connects to Lego, interestingly, is that Vista has been involved in a project through the OECD. OECD is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. You may not know the term, but you'll recognize it because that's the organization that's based in Paris, France, that makes the PISA exam. The PISA exam, the Program for International Student Achievement, is the exam that we give to countries around the world, and that's what benchmarks countries. So when you read in the newspaper about how the United States is not the top and how Sweden and Finland are at the top, that's the exam. And so they write that exam, and we're the U.S. representative for the rebenching of the PISA exam for 2022. And the reason they're rebenching it is because the PISA exam did not test creativity. And so we're very interested in that because when you think of the 21st century and you think of organizations like Lego, Google, these companies that are future forward thinkers, they need people who are creative thinkers. XQ, I was actually the principal author of our XQ grant. The kernel of the XQ grant is reimagining high school, and the high school experience was to create flexible, nimble thinkers. It's that simple. It's not complex. But when you think of a traditional high school, they actually teach the opposite of that, right? Content, follow the rules, do your homework, because homework 60% of your grade. So creativity is really critical, and actually very difficult concept to kind of infuse into the school system unless you're in theater, dance, or music, right? Or fine arts. And so how do we infuse creativity into social studies? How do we infuse creative and flexible, nimble thinkers into mathematics and English? And so that's an area that we're really kind of noodling with, and a super heavy challenge, but really fun. And internationally, we're the U.S. representative, and we just met in London. They had this international convening, and actually one of your colleagues from Lego was one of the keynote speakers
that's
about
awesome.
Creativity. And it's cool. If you think about Lego, that's kind of what it's all about. It's about creativity. And then the last thing I'll share with you, and perhaps the one that's the heaviest lift and the lift that has taken us the longest, is the district office. So we often don't talk about the district office. We talk about teachers and what we do with teachers and how teachers use technology. And sadly, a lot of the roadblocks that are created for technology and infusing technology in different ways in the classroom is because of the thinking at the district office. And when you think about it, it makes sense if you kind of sit down and play it out. The folks at the district office were in schools, but a decade or 2 decades ago. And that's their thinking. And so we've created this concept, it's called change agent leadership, which is that the change happens at the site level, and the district office leaders are servant leaders. But they're not the decision makers. And a big idea, I know, it's mind blown. How does that happen? We're not suggesting that they're making decisions about budgets and things like that, but they're making critical decisions about what school looks and feels like for kids, as opposed to things being handed to them. It's called change agent leadership. It's a really interesting concept. It's based on the fundamentals of servant leadership, and how can we apply servant leadership in an educational environment.
You mentioned creativity, and one of the things that we always talk about is, and there was a report that was put out by Newsweek, I don't know, it was a creativity crisis is what it was called. Did you see this?
Yep.
In the first part of it, they talk about on average 98% of our 3-year-olds have genius levels of creative thinking.
That's right.
And then by the time, we start school, and then by the time we get to 25 years old or 26 years old, it's down to like 2%. I like to think of myself in that 2%, by the way, so still got it. But that said, if I were to put up a picture of a circle, you guys would tell me it's a circle, right? But if I were to ask a 3-year-old, what is that picture, what would they tell me?
A sun.
Right? Could be a ball, could be a sun. So that's where that's coming from, that creative levels of thinking. So we have to think, maintain that. And with that said, there's also a report that comes out yearly from the World Economic Forum.
That's right.
And so there's trending skills that your employers are looking for, but what's trending for 2022? A lot of creativity in there in those top 4 spots. It's actually number 3, but and then number 4 is also technology planning and design, which is all about creativity, right? So again, as our educators, we need to keep in mind that This is something that their employers are looking for, and we need to maintain that genius levels of creative thinking in our students. So anyway, that's my call to action.
Okay.
Oh, see, he's
I
got
add
more
on?
too.
Go, please.
So just from what they were talking about, I think one of the things that we are starting to look at is one of the things that starts to become stale in our schools is teaching the faith. I mean, God bless the Catholic Church. We're kind of the Titanic, not a speedboat. And so what we did is we found a non-traditional partner to work with. We're actually working with Apple right now on how do we redesign all of those pieces and then place technology on the back of that. But it's by working with a non-traditional partner that it forced us to kind of push those boundaries. And I think a lot of times when you're looking at that, like when you're looking at an international thing like PISA, like again, how does those non-traditional partners that we typically work with help us push our boundaries to be able to create something new for students, redesign it? And I think a lot of that helps push the, going back to the why.
Yeah.
It helps push the why when a non-traditional partner has the lens on it and not just you.
Absolutely.
I'm just going to throw out there, I visited the Vatican like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That was awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I was telling a story at the table over there. I had a principal call me the other day and say, I know you're going to kill me, but I asked a funder for 3D printers. Because I've just never seen an actual study show me how 3D printers push student learning. They get to the point, they do the CAD, and I love that, but why do they need to print it? Why can't they just stop? What's the next step to those things? Or, I saw a school up in San Jose talk about they were 3D printing all the parts to make like a hand, but it started to take so long that they just ordered the kits because the printing took too long to get to. But the idea being is we want those technologies to help push learning. And so that's what we always look at, and we always work with our schools, and specifically around like the AR, VR. We've got high schools doing that. Instead of having to dissect a frog, they're dissecting a human heart, but with the virtual reality piece. Right. Augmenting those pieces for physics and looking at, putting stuff on tables and moving around. It's pushing the learning. And so as long as we're seeing it not as an engagement tool, but as a tool to help drive our students' learning farther than what it could be, we are all in support of it. And so it really comes back down to the purpose of what we're doing here. And we're learning a lot about creativity and really trying to push and be innovative in those spaces, but with a lens towards impacting student instruction.
Awesome.
I lost my train of thought. I always do that. So one of the things I like to, and I think you had mentioned something, I think it's, and I kind of like to leave it up to our students, but you think about our incoming kindergartners that just started kindergarten this year, what was that, September, August in some districts, right? These guys have never known a world without, Netflix, Hulu, and Amazon, right? Or
this is their reality, their entire life.
Exactly. Information's available to them 24/7. When you and I were young, we'd go ask our mom and dad or our teacher, what about this? And what did they tell us to do? Go look it up, right? And then how long did that take us? 15 minutes maybe longer, because maybe I had to go down to the library. It takes our kids, they go to Google, 15 seconds. So that whole process is accelerated, right? Even my son didn't even go to his dad to learn how to tie a tie. He went to YouTube and learned how to tie a tie for homecoming. So they have all these great resources available to them. So when you talk about technology, I think it's completely up to these kids, and I'm very much into student-directed learning. I love, this idea of Genius Hour. I don't know if any of you have heard of it, but it comes from Google, which started off as a 20% project that Google employees allowed Google allowed their employees as passion project, and they could spend 20% of their time on that. In fact, I worked for one of those folks before I came to Lego Education. But we've taken that idea of passion project into the classroom, and you guys are both very familiar with it, it sounds like, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and it allows these kids to research and actually present on their projects and build out their project. But I just, as educators and as administrators and looking out for our kids, is keeping our fingers on the pulse of what's coming out so that we can support our students in these future technologies that are coming out. And we always talk about, all these jobs that are coming up that are STEM related, and these jobs that we don't know are going to exist. But I think, it's hard to choose as far as what technology is out there. Sorry, I had to finish that sentence.
No problem. I guess what I would add, I could speak for a long time on that question, but I'll try to keep it brief. This is from a K-12 perspective. We can often fall victim when we think of technology and new technologies, emerging technologies, to the shiny object syndrome. Everyone understands that. Happens all the time in education. And that's really dangerous for kids because kids only have one chance at 3rd grade or 12th grade or whatever it is. And so if we're kind of engaged in the Shiny Object Center because there's this cool new technology out, I'll give you an example, smart boards, right? I can't tell you how many smart boards we bought that ended up being whiteboards, Shiny Object Syndrome. So there's a great author out there, his name is Peter Diamandis. He wrote a book called Bold. You may be familiar with him. He actually helped promote Google X, the spaceships now that are launching and coming back and landing. And he talked about this idea of the democratization of technology. And so what we're trying to do in our district is not look for the shiny object, but look for the object that actually is going to proliferate and actually become a daily device that kids will use. And that requires a lot of thought and a lot of planning. So we don't just buy things that are out there, VR sets and things like that, until we know that it's going to have a meaningful impact and transforming the way students think about their learning environment. And so that requires a lot of discipline. So I think we're kind of in this transformational process. We're one of the first districts to start it. We're getting a little older and a little wiser, and we're slowing down with our thinking about how we adopt new technologies and looking for the technologies we know that will have staying power and that truly can transform the learning experience for students rather than just the wow effect that is super fun for a little bit, but doesn't really close the equity gap or close the achievement gap. So that's where we are.
Very good.
So I'm back.
Okay.
Because I think that's important what you just said, the staying power, because it was interesting. Somebody was sharing with me yesterday, they visited a really great school site in the East Coast last week, and all these brand new shiny objects in there. And it costs a lot of money to bring all those shiny new objects in there. And sometimes you hear a lot of stories, and I've heard this directly from school districts themselves. They'll buy shiny new objects without a destination or a reason because they have to spend the money, and that drives me absolutely bananas. And I'd love to have the very good planning process around that. But and it's interesting you bring that up because I just was speaking to our superintendent this morning about what are we going to do to have these great new shiny objects, for lack of a better word, and completely sustain that, right? So in 5 years, that may be something that's obsolete, but how do we continue that and budget for that and have that strategic planning process and even bring in a visionary or somebody that can do that stuff. But anyway, I just wanted to add on.
Do you mind if I?
Yep, see.
Perfect. Sorry, and I just wanted to bring up our Imperial Valley, high school, which is set in not a very good economic area, has a 100% college acceptance rate. And what they do is they're chronically underfunded because of the ability for students to pay out there. Right. Just a private school problem. But what they're doing is they're pushing their technology to the limit, but that's actually attracting funders because they're seeing that impact the technology can have and wanting to push that impact instead of the opposite way around of bringing in the technology and then hoping for an impact. And so I think a lot of it comes from having those really creative, innovative people and letting them shine and then telling their story to get that out there as well.